Welcome back. I'm Brandon, the HBAR Bull, once again joined by Zepsi. We both do some contract work for the HBAR Foundation, but we don't do these weekly updates in any official capacity. We're just coming to you personally to give you the latest in the Hedera ecosystem. Welcome, Zep.
How's it going, Brandon?
It's good. We've had a busy week. We have a lot to cover, but as always, none of this is financial advice. Use it for entertainment or educational purposes only. So the first thing I wanted to get into is the announcement that came out of the HBAR Foundation about Fresh Supply Company. And of course, we had some teasers around Fresh Supply Company a few weeks ago, but this was the official announcement. And I do want to get your thoughts on this, but we did get with David, the CEO of Fresh Supply Co., to give us his insights and give us some more information. So let's listen to what he has to say. David, can you tell us what Fresh Supply Company does? What's your business model?
Well, we're a B2B fintech. We're using data for a hopefully more sophisticated approach to supply chains. We're extracting critical information from within organizations in the agri-food and commodity spaces. Those encompass aspects like proof of existence, proof of work, proof of supply, proof of quality, proof of specification. And we employ this data to activate conditional event-based payment triggering. And so that streamlines financial processes. There's also the benefits of capitalizing on automation and data accessibility to enhance credit risk assessment methodologies.
So from what I've heard, you've already done a fair amount of work with stablecoins, including with MakerDAO. Can you tell us about some of your past work in the stablecoin space?
Yeah, so we've worked with MakerDAO and Centrifuge, utilizing liquidity pools where the primary funding mechanism was DAI, right? So it's a collateralized USD pegged stablecoin, and using that as again via liquidity pool.
I gotcha. Understood. So one of the names that certainly gets HBARbarians excited, even if it's just tangential, is MasterCard. What services was Fresh Supply Co. using from MasterCard?
Okay, so there are two parts to this. One is the actual layer one, which is capturing anything that's originally starting in supply chain traceability, but what are the things that are moving in supply chains, right? Things that are inside of organizations and then writing those to ledger. So we believe in the, again, extraction, forming a narrative of what are these things? Are they containers? Are they cattle? Are they in the early part of their life cycle? Are they in the later part of their life cycle? And then the transformation of both format and then being able to watch the transformation and value, right? So as it becomes, as say for a cow, or as it travels through the supply chain, it becomes more valuable, right? Ultimately, it'll become a steak that's hugely expensive with specific genetics that's going to a fancy restaurant, right? So being able to track that and writing those events, but it's not good enough to just write events. It's what is the utility around it? What does it benefit? So again, we talked about these B2B sort of transparency use cases. Biggest risk in trade finance in the space we work in is fraud, right? Or dishonest reporting. So what we're doing, that benefit that we are adding is from a payments perspective, there's automation and there's qualities around how is this the right type of thing, right? Is it where it should be? Is it on a ship? Has it cleared customs? Is it with the purchaser on the other side? So that's one part, right? So what is the information around the things that transit through supply chains and attach to not just the things, but the financial objects? So this is the next part, triggering payment, right? So it's not just capturing the information, it's what does that information do? So, okay, well, and then being able to quantify that. So quantify that now on chain, which is one of the reasons we've moved to HBAR, specifically selected HBAR to in a more granular way, describe what are the debt obligations between two organizations, party A or party B, X amount, for these types of good. What are the goods that are linked to them, right? When will that debt mature? What is the quality of that debt, right? So payment triggering is another a big piece. And I can't share too much, but there will be a part two around the kind of MasterCard story. But MasterCard Provenance was a private permissioned blockchain. And we see that, the space is moving to public, right? So public ledger, we like the speed, we like the efficiencies, and also around the ESG benefit, right? Low energy, stable costs, stable gas fees, et cetera, right? So let me go back. There's two parts, capturing information, and then the number two, triggering payments off the back of data, right? So that facilitates payments that facilitate finance or lending.
So, is there already a demand for what you supply, or is this something that you just know is going to be needed in the future and you're supplying that solution?
Oh, we already have a reasonable sized customer base, right? So that ranges from mid-market ag producers to financiers, so funders working with funders that fund portfolios of that specialized ag lenders effectively, and also funds, right? So it's a real thing. That transformation from, hey, I'm a banker, I make my decisions based on traditional credit risk assessment, doesn't leverage information about what's happening inside of the organization. Typically, you're just navigating balance sheets, profit and loss statements. I mean, we give a unique vantage point to observe the kind of dynamic flow of assets entering and departing from inside of organizations. That's a proof point. And it's not 6 and 12 months after the fact when someone defaults on a payment, right? If you are functional, you are healthy, and you're operating, you're going to be procuring things. You're going to be adding value. And guess what? We can see very plainly that you sold them for an uplift. That's business 101, right? So again, we say, look, that's data availability for historically offline or not as online sectors, right?
Understood. So, what should we expect to see from Fresh Supply Co. in terms of Hedera network usage? As in, what services do you leverage and what kind of volumes could we expect?
That's always an interesting question. So we're working on Guardian on the what we do. Remember, we said we describe what is the nature of the goods, the type of production, what are the different credentials or certifications, and who applied them. That's also work we do on the government side because we have a clear understanding of what are the things. The other part was, you know, how are those things attached to debt or credit? So there's that part. So again, we're using the sustainability. There's a sustainability piece that's going on Guardian, but our kind of bread and butter BAU is fungible, both fungible and non-fungible tokens, and then consensus service. So token service and consensus service, and then how do we tie again non-fungible events with the fungible thing? Say there are 20 containers. Well, there'll be 20 tokens on chain, and that each have the metadata strings running off of them, right? So we believe that because of the way Hedera is architected, that we are allowed to, or we can, in a more granular way, appropriately attach information to each of these objects, right? Hence, token service. Now there's consensus service, which we're also writing this is the event that linked these goods to this financial object. So it sounds a little bit odd now. It won't be weird 5, 10, or 15 years in the future. We believe very strongly, and this is the financial infrastructure that everyone's moving towards. So if you tokenize a thing, you tokenize the payments, right? And development of the new payment rails, which would be stables and other alternative forms of paying, as well as card. There's card, I believe, has been underrated, and business typically doesn't know how to use that in the most efficient way. You get the idea that it's a consumer credit card. So that's what we're doing on Hedera. Think what are the things, what is the money owed, and what were the conditions or events that should cause a payout against these goods, right? Transactions. I mean, look, why should you be excited? Beyond consensus service, remember I had spoken about there's an event. Brandon supplied David 20 containers that sum total of $800,000, so $40,000 each. Rather than taking a hash value of that transaction, right? We're really developing that granular architecture looking forward to say, this is what happened, right? And these are the things that are attached. And the ability to manage what should be commercial in confidence with, say, a proof point that said, okay, these are the 20 things that, yes, they're fungible on chain, but they exist on chain. So that in turn gives you the portability, persistence of the data or the objects, right? This is weird now, it won't be weird in the future. This will be normal in the future. And then from a data perspective, I mean, we deal in tokenization of large amounts of physical goods. So real world assets is another theme. So I would say enough and you won't be disappointed.
Well, that's certainly good to hear. David, thank you so much for swinging by today, and we're really looking forward to seeing Fresh Supply Go ramp up.
No, thank you for having me again. As I said, there'll be a part two. You'll see enhanced capability around payments and financing, and you'll see, how would I say this tactfully? You'll see our network and relationships bring new capability to the Hedera ecosystem.
David, we know that there's a lot more to come with Fresh Supply Co. and Hedera. Thank you so much again for coming in. Good luck.
Thanks, man.
Yes, I mean, another huge use case, one that we weren't really that, it wasn't on our radar at all really until sort of a month ago. And I think that's what's probably so exciting about it. We've had these big use cases in the back of our mind, like the Coupon Bureau, things like AdStacks, of course, Atmer.io. But this is one that really came out of nowhere that we didn't have expectation for, and it is massive. The biggest user of the private MasterCard provenance blockchain. MasterCard is sunsetting that private blockchain, and what better show of the strength of Hedera than for their biggest user to come over to us. And so if you were a company getting value from the private blockchain, i.e. MasterCard, and you saw the biggest user of that ledger alongside you migrating to Hedera, I think that's a real green flag for a sort of wave of utility. Nothing there is confirmed other than Fresh Supply Co. But if I was building on that private ledger and I still wanted to use the blockchain, I'd definitely be looking at Hedera. So I'd like to think that there's at least a few more checking us out, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the future.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And you could tell David was itching. He said there was going to be a part 2. There's more information to come. So I don't think we've heard the last of Fresh Supply Co. And it's going to be interesting to see as their business grows, how that has an impact on the Hedera network. All right, so we had another conversation with Rob Allen in Shark Bites this week. We got into regulation. I was like, hey, maybe we should talk about regulation this week. And of course, mid this week, we got some huge information out of the U.S. State Department. But let's get into it with Rob and see what he had to say. How's it going, Rob?
Hey, Brandon. Yeah, it's going really well, thanks.
Well, good. So today we're going to talk about government interactions and reactions to the crypto industry. And it's pretty timely. We're recording this on Wednesday, and we just got a press release that came out of the State Department in the United States, and it mentioned Hedera. So it said, Hedera commits to convening a democracy roundtable on how blockchain technologies can and are supporting human rights, transparency, and sustainability. So right up your alley there, Rob. It goes on to say democracy-related applications of blockchain include government systems accountability, fighting misinformation, reducing data manipulation, and tracking financial flows. Hedera will invite companies, trade associations, advocacy groups, academics, and government officials, publicly share a summary of the discussion, and make recommendations on next steps. Rob, this seems like exactly what not just Hedera should be doing when engaging the government, but the crypto industry as a whole. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so, I mean, like you said, it's right up our street, and not because of, it's not coincidence, actually, that we're in this space. The Hedera network, the original Hedera team, the founding team in Mance and Lehman, and through the values that they set very early on, support democracy. It supports this decentralized, citizen-led, freedom-based approach, but it's being done in a grown-up way, which is familiar and non-threatening, unlike some areas of the crypto industry. So it's not surprising that Hedera have come out as a supportive element in this latest democracy roundtable that's being announced. We do focus on sustainability because of the nature of the network. But we shouldn't forget that ESG is not just environmental, it's social and social governance as well. And the ESG acronym is kind of the enterprise or corporate approach to the Sustainable Development Goals. And the UN Sustainable Development Goals cover everything. The iconic 17 main goals cover democracy and financial inclusion and equality and diversity and all of the things that we all should aspire to make the world a better place. So I applaud this, and I'm not surprised at all that Hedera is taking a leading position in this, because we've seen just in the first few years of the growth of the network and the solutions that are being developed on it, a great focus on areas of humanitarian relief or war zone reporting, as with Starling, or citizen-led alerts around airstrikes, as well
Power
as
systems, right?
Exactly, as well as some of the smaller projects we're seeing coming through, not just in sustainability but biodiversity, water, etc., etc. So yeah, I fully expect this to run as a constant thread through the growth of the Hedera ecosystem.
Yeah, I agree. Now, of course, there's a flip side to that coin. We started with something positive, but there's a lot of regulatory actions being taken against the crypto industry. I guess I shouldn't say crypto industry, about certain players in the crypto space. And, there's an undeniable monetary component to crypto, because the first thing you're always going to do with a ledger is probably going to be money. And in the case of proof of stake, like Hedera, there's a necessity for that currency component. It's not overly severe yet, but we're seeing instabilities in the banking system yet again. And we see that on a fairly regular basis. Do you think any perceived threat to the fiat debt-based monetary systems by governments will have long-term impacts on our industry and Hedera in particular?
I think for sure we're going through a difficult phase. The overreaction, the apparent overreaction, the apparent overreach by regulators, I guess, is a natural reaction to some of what one might say is overreach by the crypto industry over the last couple of years.
That's fair.
Technology is technology, and then you add an economic component to it, such as tokens or native crypto. There will be elements within the ecosystem that try and take advantage of that, and that's what we saw in 2022 and prior to that. So I think there's a natural reaction, and I like to think of it as kind of an oscillation, and we're at the peak, wave difference between peak and trough. But that oscillation will kind of die down over time, as long as the trend is up and in the right direction. Technology is technology, right? So blockchains and distributed ledger technologies are agnostic of human intent. We want to build economic systems that are decentralized, that support democracy, that support freedoms and citizen behavior, and the core principle of the original Bitcoin blockchain was disintermediation of intermediaries like governments, like banks, that did not add value, just took control. And decentralization is all about trust and pushing control to the edge and back into the hands of people who interact with it. I mean, the blockchain genie is out of the bottle, right? So it's with us now.
I was going to bring up something when it comes to efficiency. And of course, part of the secret sauce of Hedera, besides the really efficient consensus mechanism, is that proof of stake. So we certainly need that. But I was going to fall back on something that Tom Trowbridge said, that when you have technology that is this much superior to either competitors or to legacy systems, it's going to win. And I know a lot of people bring up, Betamax and VHS, the best technology doesn't always win, but those were really marginal differences between those two systems. Of course, Betamax had a better picture and, had better machines, but VHS had a 2-hour runtime compared to a 1-hour runtime with Betamax. So there were marginal differences between them. They had pros and cons. But, in the case of something like Hedera, you're talking about 3 orders of magnitude more efficient than traditional rails. We're talking about Visa, 20 times more efficient than our closest competitors in the DLT space. And I was going to ask, shouldn't that by itself justify the need for DLT technology? But the way you're saying it is, DLT technology is here, it's going to be used, but we just have to figure out how it's going to be used. Is that what I'm getting from what you're saying?
Yeah, and I agree with the VHS Betamax analogy to a degree. What caused Betamax as superior technology to fail is the fact that there was no interoperability between the two. Everywhere you look, if you have walled gardens, if you have closed loop systems, then those walled gardens tend to fail. They look like they're competing to start with, but the garden itself withers and dies on the inside. When those walls are broken down, then it allows interoperability and scale. I mean, we've seen that in the early days of the internet. We've seen it with mobile payments networks. We see it everywhere. Standards and interoperability are key. We're in that phase of the blockchain and distributed ledger journey, in that interoperability is now recognized as necessary. My personal view is that Hedera is so different, so unique, so beneficial in terms of its scalability, that it could potentially offer the mechanism for this interoperability. It could be a layer 0 beneath all the layer 1s. It could enable that kind of decentralized message queuing, if you like, between networks in the same way as it could provide decentralized message queuing between, and not message queuing because that suggests latency, that it's a next generation type of MQ. It could offer that between ERP systems, between enterprise platforms such as SAP, as well as blockchains and private permission blockchains. Although we're getting fewer and fewer of those because they tend not to have strong business cases, but public ledgers as well and other layer 1s. So when you've got a distributed ledger such as Hedera with scale without compromise on security, without compromise on sustainability, and you have event-driven fair ordering at that transactional level. By event-driven, I mean transactional. Then there is a unique role to play, and I think Hedera fills that space. Not only is it regulator-friendly, and by design from day one, like I said, with Manson Lehman, Natalie Furman, the first GC, very, very focused on regulatory compliance and sailing well within the line of the regulator, but also enterprise friendly, really making sure that the enterprises and the enterprise adoption of Hedera have sufficient traction during this difficult phase that the regulators kind of understand or are educated better by their peers in industry as well. I think that's one of the key benefits of Hedera at this stage. The governing council, the enterprise adoption are far more likely to help educate the regulators in a more friendly way than a host of crypto startups, which are quite easy to discount. So I think Hedera has this kind of unique position to help this agenda go forward in the right direction.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think we have a few things at our back that will help as far as the regulatory and legislative process here. A lot of the people that are the powers that be now, they were either growing up through the transition of the internet or they were young adults at the time. And I think there were a lot of people at that time who, of course, spoke out against it. They just didn't think it was going to be successful. They wanted heavy-handed regulation. They thought it was only used for nefarious things. And those people weren't treated too kindly from history, right? They didn't come out of that unscathed. They kind of looked like fools looking back. And I think that's kind of imprinted on a lot of our current powers that be, on their minds. I think they know that standing in front of what is potentially world-changing technology, which I know you and I believe this is, and I think we're proving that over time, I think they're going to consider that. They don't want to stand in front of this kind of innovation. But also, it's a world market, right? It's only going to offshore some of the technology, the innovation, the great companies that are being built around this. And eventually, when it becomes ubiquitous, which I think you and I think will happen, it's only going to come back anyway. And whichever jurisdictions don't create an environment that's conducive to it, they're just going to be that much further behind, and they're going to end up having to use it anyway. What do you think?
Yeah. In a world where you have public distributed ledgers that are driven by a native token and are interoperable, we have a really resilient, anti-fragile, alternate network. I mean, truly anti-fragile, right? I mean, that's kind of its core purpose. It's resilient to changes in government, resilient to changes in culture, even resilient to technology change over time, AI, quantum. These are all kind of big, mega changes. But what AI doesn't have and what quantum doesn't provide is this kind of new decentralized economic layer. The ability to commerce, to incentivize behaviors, to reward at a very small level, as Hedera does. So, we both said that we believe that the future has Hedera at the core. I think everything will be built on Hedera, but that shouldn't lead to complacency. The BSN, Sparta, UDPN kind of model is still a threat to that, I believe. SWIFT and the old counterparty banking relationships are, in my view, dead and kind of a zombie. It just doesn't know it's dead yet. Those two models are actually going to compete, I think, over time. And the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, with the indebtedness of nations such as in Africa and South Pacific, or the Pacific in general, that we see here, and that the leverage that has on foreign policy is a very, very powerful new growth. And I think the likes of Hedera, leading the way in terms of doing these things right, and for the freedoms of and supporting democracy is really, really key here. So we've got lots of battles ahead, and if we just continue to fight with our regulators and continue to fight between blockchain networks, because mine is my preferred color and I hate the color of yours, all that does is it detracts from the main world-changing potential benefits of this decentralized technology.
Yeah, and going back to the beginning, I think the democracy roundtable that Hedera is doing with the State Department, I think that's exactly the kind of interactions we need. We need to be partnering with the government and not adversarial. But you brought up anti-fragile, and that's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. It goes back to Nassim Taleb's book. Just to explain what anti-fragility is for anyone in the audience who might not know, anti-fragile is a concept that isn't really in the Western consciousness, as exemplified by the fact that we don't really have a word for it. Nassim Taleb came up with that term himself. But we should, since as humans, we are anti-fragile. It's a condition that when something is stressed, it gets stronger. When we stress our muscles in weightlifting, there are tiny muscle fiber tears. And when they heal, they come back stronger. A glass is fragile, and when thrown on concrete, it breaks. A steel ball is robust, and when it hits that same concrete, it doesn't change, but it doesn't get stronger. From what I've seen, crypto is anti-fragile. For example, when Hedera was stressed with the smart contract exploit we discussed a couple weeks ago, they improved the smart contract code, removed that attack vector, and thus the network came back stronger. Contrast that with the banking system, where they try to make it robust, but it's built on a fragile foundation, and it's stressed in nearly the same way, and it fails in almost the same way.
Yeah, anti-fragility requires some form of revolution. Evolution doesn't lead you to that. So, as another example, obviously a very pertinent and topical one is the banking industry. So we went through in 2008 a global financial crisis that gave birth to Bitcoin and blockchain, but it also gave birth to a lot of reactionary capital measures on banks that sought to prevent that happening again. So we then forked. We had twin approaches. So we had a banking response, an evolutionary response that led us to Basel and capital requirements, and this is never going to happen again type approach for the incumbents and the status quo. And then you had this revolutionary fork that said no to traditional banks and went right over to the crypto libertarian end of the spectrum. And then these two tracks have evolved over time, but one has deteriorated, I believe, because it has failed. We've seen with the failures of the banks over the last few weeks that they can't have succeeded because that was not, an outcome that was expected based on the measures that were put in place back in the year 2008 and beyond. And we've got a maturing set of technology which has its own kind of challenges because it's maybe too free and too able to be gamed, or fraudulent parties can use it in particular ways. And in the middle of these, you've got a regulator or a set of regulatory authorities whose sole purpose really is to set the rules on a status quo. By definition, the regulators tend to trail innovation. So, and they tend to gravitate towards the status quo. So now we've got these twin tracks. We've got a revolutionary approach, an evolutionary one. We've got a regulator that is more wedded to the slow-moving evolutionary approach within the status quo. And we've got to this point now where track one continues to fail and continues to not adapt quick enough, and a technology that has matured to the point where it's actually a threat. And so this is what we're seeing right now, this playing out of these two tracks. and the revolutionary one actually now being a threat and receiving the responses that you would expect from the status quo. I think it's all just part of the natural evolution or revolution of the space. We're seeing a lot more in terms of stablecoins, privately issued stablecoins, CBDCs, kind of technology for track one, really. It's good use of technology, but it doesn't support decentralization per se. But the issuing of stablecoins and the use of, and how those stablecoins are used, either by regulated institutions or in jurisdictions where they're allowed to be issued by other organizations other than banks, is the really interesting part of this stage in the maturation of this whole industry now. And I think what we're seeing in Australia with the CBDC pilots, and many of those projects are all about collateralizing of stablecoins. So zero risk or very, very low risk central bank money collateralizing stablecoins, which can then be used on the distributed ledgers of choice of issuance. But with interoperability in place, then that enables scale. So all of these things, I think, are now coming together, and it's a very exciting space to kind of participate in, because once you've got these primitives, these stable coins, digital money, programmable money, and you've got that programmable money issued on a scalable distributed ledger like Hedera, you have the mechanisms to actually do some really interesting and world-changing things for democracy, for sustainability, for humanitarianism. We're at the edge of doing all of those things now. So it's been a bumpy journey, but I think the challenges through the next months will probably lead to a far better combined approach across the whole landscape.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
But then I'm an optimist, so...
Yeah, I mean, of course, with the legacy systems, there's a reason for the way they've been set up like they are. They want to have free-flowing credit. That allows for the dynamism in our capitalist society. So there are important aspects of that. But, we'll see how it all comes together. Like you said, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But, Rob, thanks again so much for coming this week. It was a great
Pleasure.
Conversation that I'm sure is going to continue in the future. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Brandon. See you next week. Cheers. Bye.
So Zep, as always, Rob always has fantastic insights. We had the thought to do something around regulation and how Hedera is interacting with the government, and we had no clue that this press release was going to come out from the State Department. But just to explain what the initiative is, it's called the Private Sector Commitments to Advance Democracy, and the first couple paragraphs in this press release explain what they're doing. It says, in the run-up to the Summit for Democracy, the U.S. government issued a call to advance democracy. The call focused on 4 areas aligned with the Presidential Initiative on Democratic Renewal: advancing technology for democracy, fighting corruption, protecting civic space and human rights defenders, and advancing labor rights. We are pleased to share a variety of commitments that private sector actors have made in response to the call or in connection with the Summit for Democracy. Companies, like governments, can do more to support democracy and human rights globally, especially at a time when malign actors often exploit corporations' products to systematically undermine democracy around the world. The steps below could help in addressing important challenges if implemented in earnest and matched with additional action. And just to clarify, the Presidential Initiative on Democratic Renewal isn't talking about the Democratic Party, of course. They're talking about democracy in general. And one of the steps mentioned, of course, is being done by Hedera. So Zeb, what were your thoughts on what we saw come out of the State Department?
Well, I mean, in terms of seals of approval, I don't think it gets any bigger than that. We've seen 150, I think, 150 people are part of this initiative, and we're the only Web3 company. And so when you think about sort of this war on crypto that's been going on, this attack from the SEC, from America against, crypto innovation, and then you see the other hand, straight from the POTUS, straight in this press release, you see Hedera there at the forefront. It's almost as if Hedera isn't being sort of lunched in with all of the disagreement. We're clearly not FTX, we're clearly not Terra Luna, but we're clearly not a lot of other projects. There is real world value driven by real world applications and some of the biggest organizations in the world. And they're all championing Hedera, and we're alongside. We're shoulder to shoulder with Meta, we're shoulder to shoulder with Cloudflare, we're shoulder to shoulder with Microsoft. It's as if, we're being considered a real tech company rather than a crypto company. And I think that is so important, both from looking at our own regulatory standpoint going forwards, being in the favor of, the highest office in the world almost in some cases. Again, the stamp of approval does not get bigger than that. And I think we'll see this sort of trickle-in effect over the years. We're now name recognition from the highest office. And I think that's only going to give us a huge amount of win moving forwards.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Now, they do say they aren't endorsing any of the companies that are part of this initiative, but I'm sure they did a fair amount of vetting before they included it in the press release. And there has to be a counterpoint for our industry to the FTX stuff, as you mentioned, Terra Luna, all the nefarious stuff that's going on. If that's all that the regulators and legislators see, that's what they're going to base their decision off of. But we know that there is revolutionary things happening in commerce, happening in finance, human rights, everything else. There's so many good things that are coming out of crypto, but if we don't share those things, we're going to be in deep trouble. And I think that's what this is all about, is Hedera taking that leadership role as the advocate, not just for Hedera, but for the industry as a whole. So that's fantastic to see. And along the same lines, we saw Brett McDowell put something on the World Economic Forum. So just a few weeks ago, we talked about how he was on the main stage in Davos, and we got an announcement just, what was it, today or yesterday, that he had written something, and it's been posted on their website, and it's all around digital identity. So essentially the highlights are: an estimated 850 million people lack official identification. A coordinated policy approach is necessary to deliver institutional trust and interoperability at scale. The World Economic Forum's Digital ID initiative is catalyzing an international framework to realize financial, health, and social impact. And one of the titles to the sections is Better Privacy and Compliance Through Blockchain. And of course, this entire thing was written by Brett McDowell. He is the president and chairman of the Hedera Governing Council. So Zeb, again, this is just the same thing. You're engaging with decision makers, with policy makers around the world, and making sure Hedera is on that stage. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it's just great to see, that this sort of relationship being built on that we clearly first made at the WEF and at Davos. As we've said many times before, and building on what we just said with the press release from the Secretary of State, Hedera is the adult in the room, and Hedera is here almost not as a crypto company, but as just a real industry sort of player that can drive real world change for the positive. And this again is just doubling down on that. And I think 2 pieces of information like this in 1 week, that just gives us all the credibility that we know we deserve, especially with our new board members at Hedera, people like Betsy and so on and so forth. I think, we're only going to see more of this. They've got these contacts. They're at Hedera for a reason, and I feel this is only the start.
Yeah, agreed. And moving from the policy arena, the government, the regulation arena, to just business, we had an announcement come out about the Tribe Accelerator. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Tribe, they're partnered with, again, some of the biggest companies in the world. They're partnered with BMW, they're partnered with Microsoft, Ubisoft, PwC, so on and so forth. And they're working with Hedera on a tailored educational program for Web 2 developers looking to get into Web 3. And so that is the perfect crossover for Hedera. We've seen the companies on the council. We know that Web 2 can get value from Web 3, and we use the Web 2 developer languages. We use things like Java, Go, so on and so forth, Python. I think we've got a Python SDK. So we speak their language. We've got to be able to capture them somehow. And clearly, for Tribe to be partnered with these sort of industry leaders, they are very good at what they do. Having spoken to their team firsthand, I know that they're very good at what they do. And they've been working with Viv from the foundation. They've been working from Tom from the foundation, both on the developer team and also with Matt Woodward and co. and Ed Marquez and the team over there, the developer relations at Swart. So they've come up with a real tailored course to introduce Web 2 developers to the power of Hedera, get them to do some early proof of concepts, put them into a hackathon, and then actually incubate the best proof of concept. So at the end of this hackathon, I really hope to see some really high quality use cases that will then perhaps get funding from the Hashgraph Association or the foundation, whoever it is that wants to welcome them in. And so to see, again, just a huge partners, huge quality team, a very high quality team rather, again working with Hedera, I really feel like we're going to get some great things out of this. And the focus there, is refi, i.e. sustainability, decentralized finance, and also real-world asset tokenization, which of course we saw earlier this week. So very exciting there, and I think that's going to be sort of ends in November this year. So it's a long one for sure.
Yeah, good to see, and I'm interested to see what comes out of it. So the next thing I wanted to touch on is something that came from a community member. Shout out to Troy. And actually, I've seen commercials for this Diamond Standard a few times on YouTube, actually very regularly on YouTube. But what's really cool is it's building on Hedera. So to start off with what they're building, Diamond Standard recently announced the launch of a secondary market enabling instant trading of Diamond Standard coins. And the best news, the spot market allows you to trade for free. Each Diamond Standard coin contains a blockchain token stored on a wireless chip inside the transparent plastic coin, underneath the fungible set of diamonds. Whoever owns this regulator licensed token owns the commodity and can take delivery at any time. So it's a bearer asset. And as mentioned, it's built on Hedera, and they did a blog post on their own website talking about why they did this. Pretty much saying it's faster, done in seconds, not minutes, cheaper, pennies, not dollars, and safer. The speed, scalability, and security of the Diamond Standard spot market was significantly enhanced by Diamond Standard's recent migration to Hedera. So Zep, this is a really interesting story, similar to Fresh Supply Co., because we didn't know that they were building on Hedera. I don't think they've engaged significantly with the HBAR Foundation. I don't think they're a grantee. They might be getting support from elsewhere, but I think that they just saw a solution in Hedera, saw a business solution that could enhance their business, and started to build. So it's just good to see this. I have contacted their team. I do want to get some more information. I have a lot of questions. So hopefully I'll be able to get that interview done next week, and we'll have it next week's weekly update. But again, shout out to Troy who brought this to my attention. The community is doing a great job with their normal detective work, and another community team that has done a great job. They're great advocates for the space is Generation Infinity, led by King Solomon, and they did a Twitter space with Shane, our CEO at the HBAR Foundation, and they had some really interesting insights that came out of that. So listen in.
Metrics. The community cares about things like TPS, right? And everybody knows that, and, because that generates not only transactions, but it's an indication of interest in use and utility on the network, all very, very important. People care about the number of accounts and account growth, right? We're, almost eclipsing 2 million accounts, and there's just a lot of positivity. I remember when we started the foundation, there were only 330,000 accounts. And this was, call it August of 2021. And, here we are, almost 2 million accounts. And there are some use cases that are going to be launched on the network that are going to be orders of magnitude in terms of both TPS and account volume. And so all of those things are exciting.
You touched briefly, Shane, on potential use cases coming down the pike and going live that could even eclipse where we're at right now. I guess the question that I would ask is which segments and which markets can we potentially expect to see these use cases coming from? Supply chain, trade finance, payments?
Great question.
Yep.
Yeah, great question. I think you're going to see use cases in tokenization that are going to happen. You're going to see use cases in supply chain, not just with Atma. You're going to see things like the Coupon Bureau going live, knock on wood, hopefully this year. You're going to see, and I know that they continue to roll out things slowly, but you're going to see things in gaming in a big way. And for those of you that have been tracking some of those projects, whether it's Cosmium, it came from Ethereum onto us, or whether it's Lithos and some of the brand that they're building, the numbers are big. And then a lot of what is happening in SIF, and when you have the Guardian and some of these marketplaces coming online, the transaction volume is going to increase significantly. And then you're going to see the payments and fintech stuff. We've got a few folks working on, stable coins, some of which are public, some of which aren't. And so, I think that there is a time and a place. And I think that, so many people talk about patience, but it is that. And we're continuing to be diligent with various projects and governing council members that are doing a lot of great work. But, when you think about scale, at some of the scale of the use cases we're talking about, you would rather it be methodical. You would rather it be tested and making sure that once you roll something out, that it's truly ready to go. If any of you have ever been a part of a software development or project or any kind of software in any industry, and you realize that you roll something out too soon to a set of users, you may not get another chance. If it's a horrible user experience, or if it doesn't work like you thought it would, or if it runs into errors, or if it opens up security issues, sometimes you only get one chance. And so that's where, for me, I'm used to that kind of rigor. And I would much rather many of these projects be focused on creating a quality product and rolling it out when the time is right, as opposed to rushing it. Because I've also seen, when I invested in some younger companies in the identity and access management space, roll out a product that really wasn't ready because they got pressure from their VCs to roll it out. And guess what? It burned users, and ultimately the company suffered. And so it can have existential consequences. And I don't want to see any of that happen with us. If we as a collective ecosystem can avoid it. But I think those are some of the key areas that I think you're going to see some continued use cases get built.
So Zep, that was a great Twitter space. You should go listen to the whole thing through Generation Infinity, but there were a couple things that jumped out at me. Number one, he said that use cases that are going to be coming online are going to be doing orders of magnitude more in transaction volume and account creation. Now, I'm not sure if he's talking about, the average use case, orders of magnitude larger than that, because orders of magnitude larger than, say, Atma.io would be pretty amazing. Or if he's just focused on, orders of magnitude more account creation, through some of our gaming teams and things like that. But it was great to hear that he has that kind of confidence in what's going to be coming online in the near future. The other thing that jumped out at me was the Coupon Bureau. Now, we've been talking about the Coupon Bureau for years. It's taking a long time to actually come to fruition, but the Coupon Bureau is actually a standards body and is setting the new standard for coupons in the United States, and they're building on Hedera. Now, obviously, if that were to actually come to fruition, it's going to be huge, and that is something that can compete with the likes of Atma.io as far as transaction volume. What were your thoughts on what we saw come out of this Twitter space?
Yeah, I think it was great to have Shane quantify, the sort of success metrics that the foundation follows. And of course, great to hear that, the trajectory seems to only going to be more ambitious as we go along. But I think one thing that I took from that space was that he said, when the foundation first came into existence, I think there was about 300,000 accounts on the mainnet. And we're now nearly at 2 million. That's in a slightly over a year's work. We've seen this much happen. We know we've got use cases to go live. We know we've got the start of things like gaming. We've got the NFTs, we've got DeFi. But we've also got these other ones that we spoke about at the very beginning, like, the Karate Combat airdrop, like Karateka, like 1 to 11. These ones that we've known have been in the pipeline that should really hopefully generate some great account usage there. I think, so maybe that's the kind of things he's talking to. But when we look at something like the Coupon Bureau as well, I mean, obviously I would imagine that's going to be less accounts, as, enterprise use cases are, probably high TPS, lower accounts. But it's great to know that that's still there, that this sort of thing, this beacon that we've had in the future for so long now is getting closer. Because, like you said, if this really does take off, that's going to be, competing with Atma.io on that TPS heaviness. So really, yeah, some great things there from the spaces. Great to hear the view for the foundation or the view for the Hedera network rather is that we're only going to keep accelerating. And when we see the news that we've been covering this week, with Brett, with everything that came out of the Secretary of State, I have no hesitation about that happening.
Yeah, no question. And we're also seeing really good engagement from the council, specifically Abrdn. Their CEO came out and was talking about some of their integrations with Hedera. What are your thoughts on what the CEO of Abrdn had to say?
Yeah, so he was at Paris Blockchain Week Summit, I believe, with Duncan, who's I think our governing council member representative. We've spoken about this before, talking about governing council members, talking about the new governing council members, and saying that, they're being recruited on the basis that they're going to be passionate about the network, that they're actually building, that they've got a use case on the table, and that they are really going to be driving the adoption of this network. And Abrdn are our second most recent after Dell Technologies, of course. And to see not only Duncan representing, Abrdn and Hedera at Paris Blockchain Week Summit, but also the CEO of Abrdn, the CEO of this $508 billion or billion pound rather assets under management, investment management company, to see that the CEO is out there and really believes that the extent of how tokenization will change things like fund management, I don't think that could be any more bullish for us. To have him, who is the heart and soul, essentially, of Abrdn, talking about Hedera, doubling down on tokenization. He sees that's where the future is going, and I'm sure it's only a matter of time for other asset managers start to catch up there. So again, great to see this sort of level of engagement from the council, and hopefully we'll see the same with all of the recent additions as well.
Yeah, it's good to have, middle management support and executive support, but when you go all the way to the top, that's that much more impactful for our ecosystem. All right, so let's get into some network analysis. So TPS has dropped off a fair amount. I do think it's just at MyO. They're switching things around. I think that volume is going to be coming back, but we'll see in the days and weeks to come. Over the past 24 hours, we have 12.4 million transactions, but we are seeing a significant uptick in smart contract calls at over 40,000 over the past 24 hours. And that certainly bodes well for our DeFi ecosystem. Time to consensus came down a bit to about 4.8 seconds. Account growth has been pretty strong this week with over 50,000 accounts created. And moving down to our fungible token summary, we have wrapped HBAR, Sauce, Galaxy tokens, Dovu, HeliSwap, and USDC all in the top 10. And rounding out the top 10, we still have Grelf up there. And I'm going to get the creator of Grelf on next week to tell us about why he created the coin and what he sees for the future. And moving down to our non-fungible tokens, we have Ashfall sitting at the top. We still have the cosmetic company ElfU, and we also see Pandas, Wizards, and a few others in that top 10. So Zep, is there anything else you'd like to cover when it comes to NFTs?
Yeah, so earlier today we saw Alex Russman, who's the head of the Metaverse Fund at the foundation, tweet out that there's something going on with us, Venly, and a company called Studio 100. And Studio 100 are essentially the BBC in Benelux, or the Benelux region. And that's Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. They're a big children's entertainment, television studio, but they also have things like 4 amusement parks within the region. They do live performances, theatres, musicals, and so on and so forth. They're a real rounded entertainment studio. And that goes from the youngest up to the oldest members of society. So it's a very broad demographic that they cover within that region. And so much so that they had I think it was their 20th anniversary or 25th anniversary celebration very recently. Alex tweeted out the photo, and there were 70,000 people in attendance, which is a huge amount of people when you think of what it is, a real in-person celebration of a studio. It's like us going out to celebrate the BBC essentially in the UK. Here, they're bringing them into the world of Web3 through NFT and fan engagement. This Studio 100 were originally building on Polygon with Venly, and they decided to move over to Hedera. I haven't had the formal reasoning, but I expect it's for what we normally see, the carbon negative traits, the efficiency of the token service and the cost efficiency in particular as well, and also, the credibility of the council. But there, I believe, starting a proof of concept or, a first product with Hedera, which is, I think, 250 NFTs being sold within the region, and each of those NFTs have a sort of special event or special activity associated with it. And as I understand, if this goes well, they'll use it as an original concept, and then they'll build on that and move into other broader things. I don't know what that is yet, but maybe, sort of ticketing, this kind of stuff. So this is really the biggest entertainment studio, the biggest TV studio, production studio rather, in the the Benelux region, going into NFTs, and of course Hedera is here at the forefront. That's amazing in itself, but alongside that, they're connected with Venly, with Hedera through a company called Site Manager. And Site Manager is sort of the web flow for no-code site launching. They work with various different companies. They're one of the biggest at what they do, but until now, they didn't have that Hedera integration. And now through Venly, now through Studio 100, they are also now part of our ecosystem. So it's great to see sort of 2 stones being hit there with this partnership and just expanding the sort of accessibility to Hedera there.
And Zep, it's great to see how the Hedera market is global. We're talking about things coming out of Europe. We're talking about things coming out of Asia. We're talking about things coming out of Australia. It's just interesting to see how this world market develops. All right, so another thing when it comes to NFTs that we want to highlight is the Citadel wallet, the hardware wallet we covered last week, is doing their pre-sale through an NFT sale. They have 4 sets of NFTs. The ICE is $150 paid in HBAR, and that'll get you 1 wallet. The Fire gets you 2 wallets for $250, and the Nature gets you 3 hardware wallets for $350. So those are pretty steep discounts, and if you get all 3, you'll get airdropped their Golden Knight. I'm not sure what the benefits are around that, but it's good to see that they're leveraging our NFT community to start this pre-sale. And Zep, before we jump into DeFi, I do want to say that we're continuing on with our Twigital beta test, so if anybody wants to sign up for that, you can just go to twigital.com. There's a little form you fill out, and we'll get you the information as soon as possible. All right, with that, let's get into DeFi. Looking at DeFi Llama, Saucer Swap is still in the top spot with a TVL of nearly $24 million, up 25% on the week. Pangolin is up 10% to nearly $10 million. These increases are certainly helped out by the HBAR market. HeliSwap is struggling a bit, down about 6% on the week at just over $5 million TVL. The farming rewards on some of Saucer Swap's popular trading pairs are 14% on HBAR X, 32% on HBAR Sauce, and 47% on HBAR USDC. Pangolin's rewards are still very strong, with USDC HBAR coming in at 122%, 30% on HBAR X, and 270% on HBAR and their native DEX token PBAR. Pangolin also successfully swapped to new super farms, so if you haven't done so, unstake from the old farms and restake those LP tokens to the new farms. Taking a look at the HBAR and crypto markets, Bitcoin is flat on the week, up marginally to 28,333 at the time of recording. HBAR has had a great week and is the number 4 performer out of the top 100 tokens over the past 7 days. At the time of recording, HBAR is sitting between 7.4 and 7.5 cents, and that's up 17% on the week and 14% on the day. It seems like the news coverage on the State Department press release, which was a bit delayed, is the main cause for this bump. Looking at the chart, I'd expect to see support at about 6.8 cents and resistance at about 8 cents. All right, Zep, that's pretty much all we have. Is there anything else you'd like to pass on to the community?
I think just, this week has been a clear indicator of the institutional interest and adoption of Hedera. We've seen Secretary of State come out with their press release, the biggest stamp of approval you could possibly have. And then also the WEF with Brett, even, another massive seal of approval there. But then actually in action, live on the mainnet, you have something like Fresh Supply Co., the biggest user of MasterCard provenance migrating over. And so we're seeing, what we were designed for. From the very beginning, we were designed to enable the next trust layer for these companies, for the next generation of tech companies, for the next generation of whatever the use case is. We have been there from the start targeting these people. And of course, we have an incredibly thriving retail ecosystem as well. We've got an incredible community. And this institutional adoption is only going to bolster that community itself. The more legitimacy we have from the top, from the established Web2 companies, the more it's going to filter down to our organic NFT, DeFi, retail, gaming ecosystems. So to me, the two are just, perfectly in correlation. Institutional goes up, community strength goes up, Web3 native goes up. It's all interlinked. And if we want to be a 100-year company, this is the direction we need to be going in. And we're clearly going in it. So a great week for Hedera, without a doubt.
Yeah, there's no question about that. It was really impressive to see. Certainly tune in next week. We'll get some more information about the Diamond Standard Company. We're going to talk to the Guelph team and see what they have going on. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of other news to cover by the time we get to that point. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.